welcome to Muse to Music. Hi. Exploring the craft of the American art song. And before we begin this afternoon's event, first of all, I want to thank NYSCA, New York State Council on the Arts, for funding this particular event. Philoctetes, however, needs your support. We really go on a shoestring. We're doing more events than ever, but we need the support of patrons. Before we go on with the afternoon's activity, I just wanted to call your attention to the art show on the wall, which was it's a show devoted to the subject of public art, and you'll see the very well-known illustrator and artist Peter Siss is over here. Eric Lindveld does some extremely unusual organic paintings which are made with real materials rather than paint, and they are another form of public art. And Janine Menlove is over there, and those are works of public art that are influenced by 1930s style agitprop that was popular in the WPA. And this particular art show was geared to our panel from the WPA to the NEA, in which NEA Chairman Rocco Landesman was part of that particular panel, and we were exploring arts funding, so the public art show generated out of that. A lot of times people come to Philoctetes and they think that the art on the walls is decorative, which is wrong. Anyway, continuing on December 5th, we have a stellar panel of graphic novelists for a panel entitled The Art of the Graphic Novel. And on that panel, we have Linda Barry, we have Ben Couture. Anybody here familiar with Ben Couture's work? Yeah, yes. Hi.
Julius Nipple, real estate photographer.
Great stuff. It was in the forward for many years. And Francoise Mouly from The New Yorker, and then the experts Christopher Couch and Hilary Shute talking about it also. So we're looking forward to that. And on December 12th, our improvisational jazz series continues with Louis Porter and Mark Rossi dealing with not one but two keyboards. So without further ado, I'm pleased to present Stephanie Chase. Now, I have a whole long bio here. I should have asked you. I should have been more selective. I always read it. But you've been here many times, and you're the director. You're a president of the Music of the Sphere Society. You're a very prominent violinist.
Thank you.
You're fantastic. We had a little bit of conflict, she and I, in the beginning, because she presented some programs that I thought, these programs are so esoteric that no one will be interested in them. And we got them an enormous amount of hits on our side.
It tells me every time I'm here.
For these programs. I have to live with these particular cognitive failures. and I'm so proud of the fact that we have Stephanie here doing a program with us. So now, without further ado, I'll give you Stephanie, who will moderate the discussion and introduce our very talented guests.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Francis. It's a pleasure to be back. And today's program has to do with the American art song, and I am joined by several wonderful composers and a lovely soprano. And I will probably start with Hope Hudson, the soprano. We met probably about 5 years ago on a chamber music concert that we played in New Jersey, and then you invited me to participate in a program that you were doing, and then gradually I got to know these other composers who are joining us today. Richard Pearson Thomas, Tom Cipullo, and Lori Laitman. And yes, thank you. And we're going to hear quite a lot of music today, which I'm really excited about. But let me introduce a little bit the idea here. And this is something that I wrote up mostly from probably Wikipedia, but we can argue about what's correct or not correct about it later. From its probable origins in the songs of Francis Hopkinson, the signer of the Declaration of Independence, through Stephen Foster's Songs for the Hearth and Home, and into the 21st century, the American art song reveals the nuances of text sources and often the highly personal viewpoints of both composer and performer. Soprano Hope Hudson is a specialist in the art songs of contemporary American composers and has commissioned numerous works by today's leading song composers, including our guest today, Tom Cipullo, Lori Laitman, and Richard Pearson Thomas. Hope Hudson is a frequent guest artist at the, is it Aldeboro?
Aldeboro.
Yeah, I was wondering how to pronounce that, and I thought Edinburgh. No, okay, thank you. Festival in England, a specialist in art songs. She has been featured on BBC Radio performing the songs of Benjamin Britten. In June of 2008, she performed Tom Cipullo's song cycle of a Certain Age, which she commissioned at the National Association of Teachers of Singing National Convention. And it won, this song cycle won the composition competition by them. And
Yes.
oh, okay. That's why they're sitting together, yes. Okay, we'll go into that later, yes, for all the analysts who are sitting here. She is active in both oratorio and concert work, and her recent appearances include performances of music by Tom Cipullo and Richard Pearson Thomas with the music of the Sphere Society. That's so I've invited her to also perform on my group. Tom Cipullo, his music can be heard at major concert halls on 4 continents, and he has received commissions by major American artists and ensembles. Among his awards are the Aaron Copland Award from Copland House, the Phyllis Wattis Prize for Song Composition from the San Francisco Song Festival, and the National Association of Teachers of Singing Art Song Award for Of a Certain Age, which was commissioned by Hope Hudson. His music has been recorded on the Albany, CRI, PGM, and Capstone labels. Lori Laitman works with many of today's important poets, in addition to setting to music such classic poets as Emily Dickinson and William Carlos Williams. Recent U.S. performances of her music have taken place at Weill Recital Hall, Merkin Hall, Alice Tully Hall, Shriver Hall, Benaroya Hall in Seattle, the Cleveland Institute of Art, the Skylight Opera Theater, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Corcoran Gallery, and the Kennedy Center. In June 2004, Cleveland Opera premiered her one-act opera, Come to Me in Dreams. Her first full-length opera, The Scarlet Letter, with a new libretto by poet David Mason, was commissioned by the University of Central Arkansas and premiered there in 2008 to critical acclaim. Her songs have been recorded on Albany Records, Channel Classics, Gasparo, Capstone, and Naxos. Richard Pearson Thomas, composer and pianist, has had works performed by the Boston Pops, Convent Garden Festival, Houston Grand Opera, Chautauqua Opera, Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, Banff Center, boy, so many credentials, Skylight Opera Theater, and Riverside Philharmonic Orchestra and Choir. His songs are sung in Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, Kennedy Center, Wigmore Hall, Joe's Pub, and before the U.S. Congress by artists such as Audra McDonald, Sanford Sylvan, Lauren Flanagan, and Kurt Ullman. He is a recipient of an All-American Composers Forum Continental Harmony Commission for the Alabama Tri-State Orchestra. His work, Race for the Sky, which we're going to perform 2 excerpts from today, which was commissioned as a commemoration of the events of 9/11, 2001, has been performed by the Westchester Philharmonic Orchestra and in recitals nationwide. He has composed original music for In Thinking of America, Songs of the Civil War, which has been heard in more than 140 cities. His work, his cantata, Know Thy Farmer, was premiered on November 9th in Merkin Hall in New York City, and I was there. It was wonderful. Please join me in welcoming everybody. Thank you. So I'd like to go to the music rather quickly, and I would like to have each of these composers sort of talk about the work before we perform it, and then we'll have a general discussion afterwards and welcome questions from the audience. And Tom Cipullo has to leave us perhaps a little bit early before we're entirely done for the day, so we're going to start with your pieces. Please tell us what we're going to hear today and how you came to compose this work.
This piece is called Of a Certain Age, commissioned by Hope. And when she commissioned me, we were kicking some ideas around of what to do, what we might explore. And then at a certain point, it came to me that I would like to write a piece about getting older. I don't know why this occurred to me. I think I turned 50, I got my AARP card, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to hear 3 movements from it. Also, I have some friends who are singers, one in particular who was getting to be in her 60s and wondering if she wanted to continue performing. And I felt very strongly that singing, like communicating, like talking, is communication. And if you lose some part of your range, or if your sound isn't so beautiful, okay, you lose that. But what you lose in that, you gain in a certain depth of communication and expression. So I was encouraging her to sing. And then I went to Hope, and I asked if she would mind with this idea. And, you know, for age for sopranos, that's the third rail of music, age. No soprano wants to even hear the word age. But Hope is always and all about the music. And that's one of many reasons that I enjoy working with her. So she let me do that. And then I found this poet. Can I talk about the poet?
Please do, yes.
This wonderful poet, Liesl Mueller, whom I'm embarrassed to admit I did not know her work, but I discovered it in my research. And of course, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner. She won the National Book Award, and I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't know her at all. And as soon as I discovered her work, it was so expressive and so moving to me that I thought, this is the most wonderful thing in the world to set to music. So I had 5 of those ones. We're going to hear 3 movements today. And there's 6 songs total, 5 with poetry by Liesl Mueller, and 1 by a very talented poet, younger Judith Baumel. And I thought to myself, can I really have 6 songs, 5 by one poet and 1 by another? It sounds stupid. And then I said, so what? And so I did it anyway.
So the titles of these songs are?
The first one's called Magnolia. And then we're skipping one called There Are Mornings. Then there's one about Fugitive. The first one is sort of a bittersweet looking back. Fugitive is about the various manifestations, particularly physical, one experiences as getting older. And the last one is as one gets older, thinking of and remembering one's mother.
It's called The Garden.
The Garden.
Spring and summer decided to make it quick. life is running away with me. The two of us are in cahoots. I hold still while it paints dark circles under my eyes, streaks my hair gray, stuffs pillows under my dress. In each new room, the mirror reassures me I'll not be recognized. I'm learning to travel light, like the juice, like the juice, like the juice in the power line. Juice in the power line. My baggage swallowed by memory weighs almost nothing. No one suspects its value. When they knock on my door, when they knock on my door, just flashing. I open up when they knock on my door. I don't match their description. I don't match their description. Wrong, wrong, they say, and apologize, and apologize. My life in the corner winks and wipes up my fingerprints. No one suspects.
That is extraordinarily beautiful.
The way they do it, I was going to leap to my feet and hug them both, but I'm hooked to a microphone.
Yeah, we're all sort of.
There's juice in the power line.
And I should mention that Richard Pearson Thomas is doing triple duty today because not only are we performing his music, but he's also playing the piano for each selection. So it's a wonderful pianist, yes. So beautiful, beautiful. Would you like to go sort of continue with the songs or have a little discussion?
Whatever you
let's
want.
go on to yes,
Okay.
and maybe you would like. This is Laurie Laitman, and yes, I'd love to hear a little bit about your song. So you are what we just heard. You composed in 2008. Is that correct?
It's all a blur, but I think that sounds about right.
Oh, okay.
We started in 2006. They were finished in 2007 at Yaddo.
Oh,
And
she knows better. Okay.
and then we premiered them in 2008.
Oh, okay.
So this gives us an idea of the process, and I would love to talk about that. Once we've performed the songs. So please tell us what we're going to hear next.
These are ancient songs. They are from 1996. And when I wrote, I did not write them for Hope. I didn't meet Hope until much later when she commissioned something else from me. But she's singing two, although there's only one printed here. So I'll tell you what the other one is. That's okay. Two from my 4 Emily Dickinson songs. In my early days when I was writing song cycles, I mainly used poems by the same poet rather than having a thematic, story that ran throughout the whole song cycle. As I've gotten older, I've done more storyline or thematic, linkage through the songs. But these are linked only by the fact that they are by the wonderful Emily Dickinson. And at that period in my life, let's see, 1996, my kids were relatively young. I was younger, and I was sort of a mommy in Potomac working out of a vacuum. I had no idea how many other composers had set these poems. If I had known, I probably never would have done it, but I was blissfully ignorant. And so I just was looking for poems that I thought I could understand. And with Emily Dickinson, it's tough because there are some I still don't understand, but at least these were relatively understandable, comprehensible for me. The other one, so this is the first of the set, Will There Really Be a Morning? The other one that Hope will sing is If I, which if I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can cool one heart, now messed up on the words, but what are the words?
If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain.
Right.
If I can ease one life
That's
the
it.
aching.
Yeah, or cool one pain. If I can help one fainting robin unto its nest again, I shall not live in vain. So the If I song was actually a present from my father's 80th birthday, and he's about to turn 95. So I've continued to write a lot of songs for him and for my mom. It's she's in her 90s. She's 92, and he's 94. And so for the If I song in particular, my dad doesn't really love contemporary music. He loves melody. So, and I'm very melodic. This is, if you had to describe my music in one word, it would be melodic, I would say, or lyrical. But I tried to make an extra lyrical song so that my father would enjoy his birthday present. And I often, just one thing to listen for with all of my songs, I often use the technique of word painting, which is sort of crafting little tiny oral portraits of the words themselves. So what you might listen for in the Really Be a Morning, on Has It Feathers Like a Bird, there's some little doodling in the piano in the right hand to indicate a bird-like activity. And Famous Countries, of which I've never heard, there I took, I have the soprano in sort of one harmonic area, and the piano in another harmonic area, which further underscores the meaning of the text. It's a country that you know nothing of, so they're sort of they're parallel, but they're not unified. So I think that's all you need to know right now.
Will there really be a morning? Is there such a thing as day? Could I see it from the mountains if I place called Morning lies. Will thou really be a morning? If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. I shall not live in vain. I shall not live in
Your father must have been so pleased.
He's very happy.
It's absolutely gorgeous. Oh, lovely. And I'm involved in the next work, and I want Richard to say a few words about what we're hearing next, which is his composition.
So this work that we're going to do is sort of taking us from the realm of art song into actual vocal chamber music, because we're involving violin in this piece. The name of this set is called Race for the Sky. And after the events of 9/11, you may remember that a lot of people left makeshift memorials and poems on the streets of New York City. And a group called City Lore went out and they collected all these things before they were taken away by the sanitation department. And they have cataloged them, and they're going to preserve them for their historical value. Well, there was an exhibit done at the New York Historical Society of some of these artifacts, including some of the poems that were written at the time. And a woman named Lisa Radakovich-Holzberg contacted me and commissioned me to set several of them to music, which were then premiered on September 11th, 2002, in commemoration at the Historical Society. So the two pieces that we're doing out of the cycle, there are 4 pieces in the cycle. There are 3 songs, and there's a solo piece for violin. We're going to do the second and the fourth. The second is entitled How My Life Has Changed. It was written by a woman named Hillary North. Hillary worked for Aon Corporation, and she had gone to vote that morning, so she was not in the office when the attack happened. Pardon me. And she made a list, basically, of all the things that she would never be able to do with these co-workers of hers again. And when I first saw the poem, I said to Lisa at the time, I don't think I can set this to music, because I said maybe for a chorus or something, but there are so many names and so many activities, and Lisa was very insistent. She said, you have to do it. And I latched onto the idea of Hillary sitting on her bed with a pencil tapping this pad, and it suggested a rhythm to me, and that rhythm becomes an ostinato repeating over and over and over in this piece and growing. And when we performed the piece for her the first time a year later, she said, I had forgotten how angry I was. And the piece captured that sense of anger for her. And then the last piece we're doing is the last in the cycle. It's called Don't Look For Me Anymore. It's an excerpt from a longer poem by a woman named Alicia Vasquez. She posted it at Grand Central Terminal. And I think the poem itself is self-explanatory. The only other thing I would like to mention is why the violin is here in this piece. It's because there was a young violinist named William Harvey who went to the armory and he played for the workers and what have you. He said he ran out of pieces to play. Finally, he was down to Turkey in the Straw. But he wrote this wonderful letter about the experience, and when I read the letter, I just felt that the violin had to be there. There was that extra voice, and it also represents maybe the voices of those who are not here. So the original intention was not to have violin, but eventually it had to have it, and it's really an integral part of the piece. So let's give it a shot here.
Don't look for me anymore. It's late and you're tired.
And while I'm doing that, perhaps I'll start out with a question for Hope. Beautiful, by the way, just really wonderful. It's hard to sing that, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's even harder after you've played the meditation. So,
Yeah,
which you didn't get to hear today.
Yeah, we connect everything. What attracted you to each of these composers in terms of what they present in their sound and the songs and the texts that they work with?
Well, actually, just a little background. I should have met Richard about 20 years before I did. We had several friends who, you know, on different sides of the fence, so to speak, and there are so many coincidences in our lives. Like Richard lives on 104th Street, and for a while I lived in the garden apartment on 105th Street, and Richard's window overlooked my garden. At one point we lived in the same building. I mean, just so many, you know, so many coincidences. But actually, I didn't meet him officially until January of 2002, but it was because of 9/11 that I first heard his songs. Richard and I have a mutual friend who did a recital down at Trinity Church before the towers were hit. And I was living in Battery Park City at the time, and December 1st I moved back uptown because I just couldn't take living down there anymore. And I had a recording of, actually Richard was the pianist on the recording, that David, our friend, had been badgering me to listen to. And I remember I was sitting in my apartment thinking, I didn't know what to do with myself. I couldn't understand what had just happened to us as a nation and especially a city. So I picked up David's recording and started listening to it. And there were two songs that I was especially drawn to. One called Just Another Hour. And then When I Kiss You, and I thought, God, those are such gorgeous songs. I wonder who the composer is. There were no program notes or anything. So anyway, fast forward, I had been asked to do several recitals that spring, and I had not been working with a pianist in a while. So I asked David, I said, well, who's a really good pianist? And he said, Richard Pearson Thomas. And then I asked another set of friends, mutual friends of ours, well, who's a really good pianist? And they both said, well, Richard Pearson Thomas. I said, okay, well, I'll call Richard Pearson Thomas.
It was fated then.
Yeah, it was fate, yeah. So anyway, that began our collaboration. And in January, it will be 9 years? Yeah, I can't add, but anyway. So that was my first taste of Richard's music, so to speak. And shortly after that, I commissioned him to write a piece called, well, it was on the text that Benjamin Britten had set called My Beloved Is Mine. And I loved the poem, but I wasn't so crazy about the music. So I presented it to Richard, and that was my first commission. But actually, had it not been for Richard, then the collaboration with Tom wouldn't have happened. And actually, had it not been for Music of the Spheres, the collaboration with Laurie wouldn't have happened. But I started my doctorate at Columbia, Teachers College, and I said, you know, Richard, I think that I really want to commission some other composers. And he said, well, try Tom Cipullo. So I stalked Tom for a while, and finally he said yes. And of a certain
2 seconds.
so of a certain age was then born. And then when you asked me to do the Shostakovich songs with Music of the Spheres, I knew Warren Jones was going to be the pianist, and I found a recording of Warren and a wonderful soprano named Jennifer Check. And it had the Emily Dickinson songs on it, and I thought they were just incredibly gorgeous. And so that's how my collaboration with Laurie began.
Yes. Thank you. So how do you go about? I mean, first of all, what made you decide to become song composers? I mean, and presumably, do you compose things besides songs? Do you compose symphonies or chamber works or piano pieces?
Yes, I do. Opera. I have an opera going on in a couple hours, which is why I'll have to leave you early, I'm afraid. And orchestral music and piano music. I write songs, and I'm very eager to hear what you guys have to say. I write songs because when I was going to school in the 80s, almost everyone was writing in this very sort of severe style, and you were very much encouraged to write in this severe style with lots of atonality and less of an insistence on, or less of an interest in tonal harmony. However, if you wrote for singers, they'd let you pass on writing some tonal music. They'd say, well, singers, they can't just put their finger and find the pitch. Sure, I understand. As a singer, you can write some tonal music for a singer. And, of course, it's not true. Singers are some of the finest musicians in New York. But I found that was really where my heart was. That was where my expression was. And I had a teacher, David Del Tredici, who at that time was in the forefront of the return to tonality and new romanticism. And he told me something very important. He told all the students, when you're going to graduate school, you must realize composing has to be fun, because you're not going to make any money. You're going to your whole professional career will be a series of miseries in some way. But the actual act of composing, and while you're at school, there's a whole bunch of people who are going to try and make this the least fun thing possible. So, and if you work with singers, you have a lot of fun, and you meet sopranos.
Aren't you lucky? Added bonus. Lori, what
Well, I'm sort of an accidental art song composer. I had my early training was writing music for film and theater, and I was very interested in that. And actually, the way I approach every poem is, for me, a poem is like a baby film, and I'm the director. And so I respond to changes in mood, and what I'm doing with everything I do is writing dramatic music. So there's there's twofolds to the composition: writing a beautiful line that the singer can sing, and that they can sing well. A happy singer is a good singer, in my opinion, or a good singer is a happy singer, or whatever. I like to make my singers happy because then they can communicate the words. It's all about communication, and I forget what the other folds. There were two folds. But so it was in 1991. An old friend of mine, a singer, a soprano, Lauren Wagner. She said, "I'm about to make my debut CD. I want you to write some songs for me." And I said, "I don't know how to write a song," which she insisted. And I wrote my first song, and it was really great. And it was very easy for me to write, so I just never stopped. And in terms of me writing other things, I try not to write anything that isn't for voice, because all of my musical ideas spring from the words themselves and my attempt to dramatize them. So I write songs, I write opera, oratorio, anything. Doing my first chorus piece now, it's very interesting. It's a very different sort of beast, but I'm mainly interested in words and stories. So I'm driven by the text, as well as creating something beautiful. Obviously, that's my hope, but it was sort of all an accident. Yeah.
Happy accident.
Yes, I was an accident too. I just want to say that.
I don't know if we want to go into that.
No. But it's important because I was an accident. My parents were so much older. My mother used to plot me. This is my own psychoanalysis in front of a record player, and I used to listen to stories in song like Peter and the Wolf, and so everything from the very beginning was words and music.
My husband talks about Burl Ives on record.
Yeah.
That voice, and so I'm a little bit too young for that directly, but my husband remembers Burl Ives on recordings for children. So, Richard, what caused you to be attracted to?
First of all, to amplify what Tom said, we were not encouraged to write atonal music. We were sort of required to. I mean, like if you wanted to get a grade or whatever, you had to write this really gnarly music, and it was nothing that ever really spoke to me. And my interest, especially growing up, was musical theater. And I love the theatrical possibility of the connection of words and music. So it became a natural step then to do the classical version of that, which is art song. But I tend to approach most things that I write from a dramatic or a theatrical standpoint as much as possible. I certainly write a lot of other music. I find that I have to. If I only write vocal music, I feel like I get stuck. So I've had orchestral commissions, and I love doing chamber music and what have you, because it's another way of composing and using the brain. And then I can return to words refreshed.
Mm-hmm. Do you play other instruments besides piano?
No.
Do any of you actually sing well? Or
No, I'm terrible singer.
No, we're terrible.
Flutist by training.
Yeah.
So when you are working on
I
a
sing,
song, yes,
but nobody wants to hear me.
Same here.
Bad.
So do you often work directly with a singer who says, well, you just sort of imagine what can be done?
I know what
know,
it should
instinctively.
be. Yeah, that's it, instinctively.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So,
How about
what's
you
your?
guys?
I mean, do you sing much atonal music or?
No, because when I was at Manhattan School of Music, that was just before these guys. Well, they're a little older than I am, but when I was at Manhattan, the music that was being written, with all due respect, was not tuneful, and so the couple of composers that I worked with. I sort of went, well, gosh, I don't want to do this. I was actually seeing a fellow at one point who was a composer, and he presented some. And he studied with a very famous composition teacher, and he presented some songs to me, and they were unsingable. They were. They were like B flat C, the upper, high C. 4 measures, and I said, I can't sing these, and I don't think any other soprano can either. I don't think we can stay up there. So when I discovered their music, I was like, okay, this is great, and I've always loved English and American art song, and so it's been an incredible experience for me. To have these.
Yeah, I mean, what is your range? I mean, you have a large range. I mean, would you...
F below middle C, and last week I vocalized up to A flat above high C.
Oh my.
But
okay, that's.
But I wouldn't sing that in public. Just
That is stunning. That's
Yeah.
a huge range. It's amazing. I think.
I don't know how pretty it was actually, but.
That's the juice in the power line.
Yes. Well, what in a test appeals to you? I mean, you like the...
Oh, for me, there's
Yes.
several things.
Well, for everybody, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that you look for, that can
Are
make
you
a
looking
great
for like
song.
rhythms in the way the words appear,
No,
or
for
just
me, it's
imagery?
always, sometimes it's imagery, sometimes it's emotional content, and sometimes it's a beautiful turn of phrase, and it's just a connection. And obviously, if you have a narrative poem, that's really great for a song because people can understand it. Sometimes you can have a great poem, but it won't make a great song because it's too complicated. And sometimes you can have a really bad poem. And if you're great, like us, we can make great songs out of it. But it's better to work with great poetry because you have more
what about
to
Emily
hang up to.
Dickinson in particular appeals to you, for instance, in her
Well, I
poetry?
mean, what appeals to me about Emily Dickinson is her unique view of the world. I mean, looking at everything that everybody else looks at and seeing it differently and expressing it so beautifully in a completely different image than most of us would think about. Mm-hmm. So that's what I love about her.
And Tom, same question.
Well, I said Emily Dickinson. I never wanted to. It was a commission, and I really needed the money, so I did it. But then it turned out this wonderful person commissioned me. It turned out to be a very big turning point in my career. One of the best pieces I ever did, and because I think at that moment is when I realized what my goal was in writing songs. And because I think a lot of people, and in school, I always thought the goal was you take a poem, you're going to somehow illuminate or enlarge or expand or make this poem clear or something like that. And I don't think that's what we do really at all. What we do is we take that poem and we give you, or at least I, give you my reaction to that poem. It's all about me.
Right.
It's all about my feelings.
Yeah.
So, and that sounds incredibly egotistical. But what is really more egotistical? Saying that I am going to shed new light, on Walt Whitman, or that I am just going to tell you how this touched me and why. That's why, I read Ned Rome say once, you can set a poem to music if you don't understand it. And I think that's completely true. If you have this reaction to it, that is so powerful.
It's better if you understand it, though.
It's better if you have your understanding.
Yeah,
That's right.
And it may not have been the poet's.
Right.
That's right.
There may be a million.
It's every song is just our interpretation, our personal interpretation of the poem.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting when you hear, like, if we all said the same poem, how different it might be. Mm-hmm. But I think between the three of us, we're very respectful of the words, and some composers are not. And I love that you are and you are and that I am.
Well, I want the words to be intelligible. I
Yes,
want the
of
audience
course.
to understand it.
Yeah.
I write a lot of my own text too, because a lot of my theater music and cabaret things. I write my own texts, which presents its own challenges.
Yeah.
Do you compose in other languages besides English texts?
I don't,
I've done some Italian.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I've done some German and Yiddish in addition, combination of, like, I just did a dual setting of the same poem in German, the original German, and then the English translation, and that was very interesting of how one informed the other, and then when the grammar or the changed, because everything for me is focusing on the important words in a phrase. If the German phrase was different than the English, then the melody had to be changed accordingly. And also, it was a setting of Paul Celan's Todesfuge, and it had the word Schlangen, which in Yiddish has, quite a different meaning than snakes. And it was like when I went to the German to set it after the English, it was like, oh. That was
So
really...
what musical gesture did you put with that?
I left the same musical gesture, but it was really eye-opening.
Okay. Do you find that, we're all native English speakers, but I would think that there's sometimes an issue with consonants and in languages and having them project properly. I don't know. I don't compose for
That's the singer's job.
Yes. So the difference between singing Italian and German, for instance.
Well, that's a matter of diction, and you study that hard.
Yes.
Yeah, to make that work.
I'd like to invite audience questions at this point. Does anybody have any questions for? Yes.
I'd like to share that one of the most beautiful words that I know is the Greek word for a troubadour. It's called a rhapsodizer, which really means song stitcher. And I was wondering, when you write, from where does that voice, that musical voice, speak from? And as some people have said, we live between a sense of awakening and surrender, veiling and reveiling, that space between thoughts. If any of those things touch you, but where does this voice of music speak to you from, and how do you communicate that, romance it?
Well, I'd like to start.
Please.
And where does it come from, and how does it happen? And I would like to tell you I have absolutely no idea. And I'd be curious what my colleagues think, because every time I sit down to compose, and it's not even a new work, like every day when I sit down to compose, I can't remember how you do it. And you just sort of sit, at least I compose at the piano, so I sit there and I try. And sometimes I can think, well, I have to go back and find a motive, this has to come back or something like that. But where it actually comes from, I have no idea. And I think, if I remember, someone will correct me, but like the idea of inspiration, it's something else breathing through you, right? It comes from someplace. So I suspect that artists forever have had this sort of the same feeling. But I also know there's a quote that I try and live by when I'm composing from Aaron Copland. And he said, two quotes actually, when you compose, you're trying to create an illusion. You create the illusion of inevitability, as if your music had to be a certain way, when in fact it could be any way. Notes can go anywhere, but you want people to feel like it dropped from heaven that way. And I think if you can take that illusion of inevitability, and at the same time, for me, the idea of surprising people is important. Can you surprise someone and be inevitable? And in a sense, that sounds like it should be contrary, I think, but I don't think it is. Surprise, inevitability. And the last thing is there was a great composer, Stephen Albert, who died tragically very young, but a sensational composer. And he said, I've come to believe that so much of what we do is really an accretion of details. Details upon details upon details, knowing what you want to do with your music, and then bringing every technical aspect you learn to underline that moment that you want to make something of.
I think there's a macro and a micro. Like you have a sense of a piece, what you want to do with it, but then we have to make thousands of decisions. And like if you're writing for orchestra, well, every instrument you have to decide what it's going to play, and you have to fit into the range and all that. So there's a lot of real just work you have to do. But that's after the inspirare, after, whatever that. I agree with Tom totally. I can sit down at the piano. I don't know where it comes from. It just comes.
I know where mine comes from.
We share.
It comes from the words, and that's why I love working with words, because otherwise I'm like, you guys, I agree. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But when you have the words, and you want to make, you have that desire to set the words properly for the singer, and for me that means emphasizing what I consider important in every line or phrase, so that, you can do that by a variety of musical means. You can jump up to a note, you can hold it longer, you can jump down, you can do whatever you're doing. And then I see patterns in poems, because they exist. And if I'm attaching musical notes to a particular pattern, and that pattern repeats, then you have to bring that back there. And so for me, it's when I, quote, lose my inspiration, which doesn't happen that often in a poem, I just go back, what do the words mean, and how can I express them with a musical gesture that will illuminate them? So for me, I'm always, that's why I hate not using words. This is much, much harder. So I just don't do it, like you guys.
If I might add a comment, I think we're all talking about there has to be a technical foundation. You have to know what you're doing, basically, but that you are able to sort of spring forward from that and be almost liberated from it. So when I'm playing a phrase, for instance, I'm thinking to myself, there's a natural way of playing a phrase. There's a rightness to it, and everything else seems sort of wrong. And so I think what I'm looking for as an interpreter of music is to look for that, how does this phrase want to be played, basically. And so I don't know if singing is like that at all, because, we have to be aware of the technique, and yet there's a sense of, yes, this sounds right. In terms of experimenting, you try things out, and then you hear it, and then say, oh, yes.
Well, actually, with these three, they usually tell me what it's actually harder having. Well, it's not like Mozart and Handel. If I'm doing one of their pieces, are going to knock on the door and say, "Wow, I really hated the way you did that phrase." But we've collaborated enough so that I trust them completely. So if they tell me, "Well, I think that's not quite kosher the way you're doing that," then I'll do it the way they say.
So it's a very collaborative process.
Absolutely.
Isn't it?
Actually, the dissertation, it started out being about commissioning, and now it's actually on collaboration. Because during the singer and composer really only started collaborating around the time of Brahms, Schumann, Clara Schumann, Jenny Lind. There was a circle of collaboration there. Of course, Mozart and Handel wrote for specific voices, but there was really not what one could call a collaboration. And I feel like, there's such an incredible bond among us with the music.
And do you sometimes select texts and ask them to?
Well. I'll use Richard as an example. Several years ago, I found some Teasdale poems that I really liked, and so gave them to Richard, and he came back several weeks later, and he had started setting the poems, and I was like, these were not my favorite ones, and he said, well, I've already started sketching them out, so...
We're in her file, though. I didn't choose them out of thin air. They were to be chosen
amongst,
from.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't quite what you expected. But
right, but they are fantastic
right
songs.
Right poet, wrong poem. Yeah.
And then I think, Lori, for Dear Edna, you chose the poems.
Yes, but I asked you if you
right,
liked them.
Yeah. And then with Of a Certain Age, Tom really chose all the poems.
You gave me Teasdale poems again.
I did not. No, it was... I can't remember the poet now. Anyway, but the last song, Tom. I actually went over to Tom's one afternoon, and he said, "I want to show you a poem." And my mother had passed away in September, and I met Tom shortly after that, and he started setting the other poems that he had shown me. And he said, could you come over? I have another poem that I want to show you. And it was The Garden. I said, it's beautiful, but I won't be able to sing it. Please don't do it. So a couple weeks later, Tom said, could you come over? I want to show you something. And it was The Garden, and of course it's perfect. So...
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, but in the context is
it
difficult.
was.
I have to say, in performing Richard's work, Race for the Sky, I also went down after 9/11 and played for the rescue and recovery workers at St. Paul's Chapel, which was a very difficult experience. I had to go through the National Guard barricades and go through the police and went in and played, and it was only, the chapel was closed except to the rescue and recovery workers, and it was a very difficult situation, but I felt that it was the least that I could do. But I will always remember that, and I have to say that the first time I played this piece, and we're often in tears afterwards at the very end, but I mean it was almost unbearable.
Yeah.
And I was sort of unable to think about the words. I mean, the music alone was so powerful in that context. So it's it can be very, very emotionally draining.
And it's funny. With The Garden, I had to sing it so many times before I could even get through it, before we premiered it. And then with Race for the Sky, I mean, sometimes it will just, I'll be fine when we start the cycle, and then I'll think, oh my God, I cannot get through this. I can't make it. But Race for the Sky is I think really cathartic for me because of, I went to work that morning, thank God, and I didn't go back for 3 weeks. I didn't go home for 3 weeks, and it brings back a lot of memories from, seeing the devastation. But I think in a huge way, it's a healing process for me.
It's a wonderful work.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a privilege to play it. It really is. I'd like to invite some more questions.
I'm afraid I think I'm going to have to...
Tom has to go because he... What is it that you're going off to?
I'm trying I have an opera, Glory Denied. It's being done by Chelsea Opera today.
Wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Sorry you have to leave us.
I'll answer the questions for you, Tom.
The piano for you answer the questions for me. You do both better than I.
No, I'm not sure about that.
Thanks again, Tom.
Bye.
Good luck with that. Bye. You had a question?
Yeah, my question is, if you all were working with a lyricist who was alive, not Emily Dickinson or yourself, and you read a piece of music and the lyricist didn't agree with it, then what happens?
Well, do you want to answer
Gosh,
that?
I'm trying to think if I've had that experience. Have you?
No. And usually, I mean, with the classical art song, unless you're doing an opera, then you have a librettist, but you're not working, it's not the same as like a pop song where, there's, I mean, the classical song, the poem is there, and the poet, you have to get permission, and usually they're very, very happy. I mean, they've been very happy with what I've done. Nobody's ever, there's one poet that actually got angry at me, not for the setting, because she never listened to it, but for some other reasons and took her permission away. But generally, it doesn't happen that they're unhappy.
It could, though. I don't know. I mean, you would have to compromise. You'd have to, talk to that person and see what it was that they didn't like or what was not resonant to them in your setting of their work. I mean, we were very nervous with Race for the Sky because of the extreme emotional connection, like Hilary North in particular. She could have said, I don't want this done, in honor of these families or whatever, I don't want this done. So the first time we did it for her, we were very nervous that, that could have happened. Usually I think, if you feel that the song works, if you feel that, then the poet is probably going to feel that, and the audience will too. Generally, if something doesn't work, I don't feel it, the singer maybe reacts, when it works, and I think most poets would recognize that.
And generally, they cede permission. I mean, they're gracious enough if you get permission from a living poet, and I work with a lot of living poets. They understand that it's going to be my baby that I'm making with their poem, and it's my thing, you know. I mean, that sounds egotistical
Well,
too,
that's
but
what Tom was saying,
yeah,
same thing.
yeah, you know, it's my interpretation, and they can also, you know, give the same poem to another composer, and come out with a completely different, you know, piece. But in terms of libretto, you know, when you're doing an opera, I think there's much more flexibility back and forth. And what happens is there are a couple of times when I've been on the phone with my librettist and I say, what do you like better, this chord or that chord for here? And he has a distinct opinion. And he says, I like this one. So I go, okay, I'll use that one. Or I might say, I think that we really need to do something else here dramatically. And could we bring this back as a refrain? Or could I switch the words up or whatever? It's a collaboration. So just sort of mutual respect.
Any other question? Yes.
I'd like to ask you about the strange circumstance of your having been educated in a time when the atonalists were so powerful and influential, and what it's like for you now, what the political climate is today, and how you see yourself in that, and if you're returning to tonality, how you feel yourself. Do you think about that, about where it is within that tradition that you are returning, and how much do you think about the function of the tonality that you're using?
Okay, I'll dive into that, because that's been a major issue for my life as a composer. Because when I graduated from Eastman, like I said, there was an expectation of how we were to write, and I did in order to get my A for my composition lessons, but I didn't think any of the music was very good. And so I really went the other direction, and I moved to New York City to write musical theater. I was just going to write tunes. And of course, in the meantime, musical theater has all changed, and it's gone in a different direction than I would have had it go. So through the process, I've kept my sense of tonal center, although my music is really all over the place, and it rarely starts in the key of C and ends there. But there's a tonal center that keeps the ear grounded to it. I just never felt that I wrote atonal music well. And I had a certain amount of resentment that we were supposed to write that way, and yet this was the same music that was alienating audiences and not making them want to hear new music. So there was this sort of double standard of like, why are we writing music that people don't want to listen to? That's crazy. I want people to listen to it and to feel something and to go away, remembering that experience. Charles Strauss came when I was at Eastman, and his was the opposite. He moved to New York City to write concert music and ended up being a successful musical theater composer, and my career has been sort of the opposite.
What are the politics like here?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think there are many different levels of the politics. And in order to get to that very top level, I don't know what it takes. Obviously, the minimalists were in control for a while. But now it's a little more free for all, I think.
Yeah, I feel happy for composers today. Like I had the same experience, but I was fortunate that I didn't have a degree in composition. My degree was in flute performance, so I studied composition, but it was more from this film and theater, where it was acceptable to be lyrical. But I remember being very self-conscious that I didn't have a degree in composition, and I wrote, quote, like beautiful music, and it was almost like an insult that you could compose something beautiful.
Right.
It was like
there was that time.
And so now, of course, I think beautiful music is much more accepted, and everyone's so fortunate to be able to have access to so much music with the computer and everything. In terms of politics, or just whatever, I always just did my own thing and was blissfully ignorant, and I still do that to this day. And I think if you're writing good music that singers want to sing, singers are going to sing it, and that's where you will find your success. And I don't care who's doing what. I only want to do what I want to do, and it will find its way in the universe. So,
any more questions? If I might add a comment on that, or would you like to make a comment about how would you actually describe atonality? What would you say that is?
Well, I mean,
This is the Music of the Spheres question, by the way.
Okay. I mean, obviously, the official definition of atonality is music that does not have a tonal center. It's not based in a key. But what we're talking about was beyond atonal. When I was in school, it was the shredding of music and then putting it back together in an intellectual way.
Yeah.
You know, anything that had a sense of heart or emotion was pretty much stomped on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think you can obviously you can have atonal music. Alban Berg is the prime example that really does have an emotional heart to it. But that's not what we're talking about when I was in college. You know, it was you know, that post-war
Sort of formulaic then, and a second and a ninth and a this and a that.
And you know, you didn't want to give your audience anything to grab onto.
Yeah.
You know, you wanted to confound them in a way. You wanted to make them think, well, that's good, but like Tom said, he can write a weird chord somewhere that makes your audience think, and yet it's within a context that the audience is really listening.
Well, people respond to consonance and dissonance, but you can't have only just the dissonance, I think, without the consonance. Otherwise, your audience is rather unhappy about it.
It wears people out. I mean, too.
Yeah.
I mean, and I have the sophisticated ears to listen to it, but it's like, hey.
Right.
It's
you know, if
sort of
there's
violent or chaotic.
If there's no real rhythmic thing you can hold on to, if it's all just about color.
If you're talking about the actual proportions of music, it's very interesting because, for instance, an augmented fourth would be the equivalent of the square root of 2. They're irrational numbers, what we call dissonant intervals, and consonant intervals are nice proportions or ratios. Like the fifth is 2 parts out of 3, the octave is 1 part out of 2, and that's exactly how the violin string works. You know, when we're playing on it, we're actually shortening it and lengthening it by these very specific distances. And so we're working constantly with those proportions, physical proportions, you know, even though most of us don't realize
Well,
it.
because it's the laws of physics.
That's
yeah,
right.
exactly.
These all vibration laws of physics. Obviously, certain things that vibrate a certain way make us feel better than others.
Yeah, and people respond to these whole number ratios, for instance, rather than the irrational numbers. So I think that's interesting. I have a question. Do you write texts, music for texts that are sort of gender neutral, or do you?
It depends on who I'm writing for or whatever. When I was...
if you're not writing for somebody specific, you're just writing a song,
usually I'm writing for somebody.
Okay.
So, like when I was writing for a countertenor, it was very interesting because I didn't want to do like a love song and have like a guy singing in a really high soprano voice because I thought it would be odd. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to pick text that would be. Just right for that occasion. Mm-hmm. You want to pick the right thing for whatever occasion it is. I think the biggest shock to me was when I was picking something to write for chorus, because you're writing something for a group of college kids, and they also, it can't be first person. It can't be, like I fell in love with you this day or whatever, or I did this or whatever. And it was very, very hard. I had to go through so many poems before I could finally figure out what would be appropriate. And I actually picked a poem that was about 2 trees in the forest growing together and then becoming entwined, which was actually derived from the Tristan and Isolde myth. And then I was going to set the second song for that, the same derivative, but seemed from an Eastern as opposed to a Western. So it's always a challenge to find the right thing for the right person. And when I wrote for Hope, I was doing a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, What Lips My Lips Have Kissed, and Where and Why. Not to suggest that you have kissed so many people or not kissed so many people, but it was just a great poem, and you're theatrical. And then I took 3 poems about Edna St. Vincent Millay that suited Hope's personality, I thought. So everything is sort of custom picked. You must find that as well.
Yeah, in terms of gender, it really depends on who's singing or who's commissioning the piece or whatever. That's a variable. Mm-hmm. The piece you heard the other night was about food, so there's no gender involved.
Well, except in foreign languages, yes.
Yeah. Right. That's true. That's true.
I think we have a question here.
When you're writing and you're all working on so many projects at once, how long could it take you? I mean, what's the longest amount? What kind of time? What's your day like? with
Yeah.
so many
Well,
things?
sometimes a song will come very easily to me. Like my very first song, I probably wrote in like 10 minutes, and then I was very, very worried that it wasn't any good, and I was going to throw it out. But it was really good, and I love when that happens. And sometimes a song can take months, and it really depends. I wrote my opera in 11 months, and then 4 months to orchestrate it. So. It took me 9 months to do a different song cycle. Generally, a song cycle of maybe 10, 15 minutes length, 3, 4, 5 songs will take me about 3 months if there are not like very big complications in my own life, with my family. But so it varies.
Yeah, it varies for me too. I write relatively quickly once I have the idea. It can take me a while sometimes to click into an idea that I think works, and sometimes it takes several tries. There's one song that I recently wrote for Hope that I wrote 2 or 3 versions before I landed on the one that worked. So, but once I get going, I'm pretty fast. And then I tinker.
Question there?
Yes.
Are either of you incorporating any technology, use of surveillance or any other?
Well, I certainly use the software to create all my scores.
The question was about technology and incorporating technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me also, I use pencil and paper, and then I just use my computer to put it on, get it into the computer, and which is helpful because then, at least you have less chance of losing the piece of paper.
The one thing I can say about the computer is the amount of music I can generate is greater now in a lesser amount of time. Because it takes so much less time to write it down than I can just put it in the computer easily.
Do you see technology as being a drawback or a hindrance in any way in terms of some people maybe not understanding the underlying skills and thinking they can take shortcuts?
Well, absolutely, but that's a fact of life. There are plenty of composers. I mean, I studied film scoring for a year in LA, and there's plenty of guys that don't really read music, and yet they're very successful because they can play with their boxes and make nice sounds. And then other people come in and they create the scores, the guys who have the actual training. I think the danger for a composer is writing music for a computer. Your computer will play it back for you, and you can kind of go, oh, that sounds good. But when you hear it with real players and with breath and space, it doesn't work. So you have to be, and you can also spend all your time trying to tweak it so that it sounds good on the computer. And why do that if you're writing for real performers? So it's good and bad.
Just one more question.
Sure.
You mentioned what your parents did when you were growing up.
Yes. What did I do?
What were you doing? And
Well,
yours musical.
Mine are all musical. They're 24, 27, and about to turn 30. And my youngest son is a pianist in LA and a composer. My daughter is a cellist and a composer. And my oldest son is a lawyer and a pianist. So they can't live without it. And they just had music. And we had a lot of fights in our house about music. Like my youngest son was extremely fast, and sometimes my daughter would be upset if maybe he played the same piece on piano a year after she had played it, and then, or if my oldest son, because oldest children tend to, in my view, be more controlling, didn't approve of what maybe the youngest was playing, he would take the music and hide it, and it was just a lot of interesting musical problems.
I have a question for Hope, except I haven't formulated it yet. But it has to do with the fact that there are an awful lot of songs out there already, and a lot of music that you could be singing. And I think it's so remarkable and so wonderful. I mean, to have this process that really has had a lot to do with your initiative in commissioning people. What made you decide that you really wanted to commission composers to create new songs for you to sing? Yes.
Yeah.
The inspiration. Yes. Okay. That's nice to hear. Yeah.
Richard and I have competed in the American Traditions competition a couple of times in Savannah, and the last time we were there, the people that we stayed at, and they're friends of ours, but I did not make the finals, and but we stayed in Savannah, and Kathy, our hostess, came home that night, and she said, well, this woman that made the finals sang something in the finals, and I just didn't know what it was. And so it was online, and I listened to it, and it was a very well-known American art song, and I thought, oh my gosh, she doesn't, people are just, this is not out there enough. And I feel it's really important to make use of these incredible composers. I commissioned, a couple of years ago, I commissioned Richard to write 8 songs for some of my students on Long Island. And yesterday, we had the NATS competition, National Association of Teachers of Singing. And Richard always plays for my students, and a couple of the teachers came up to me and said, thank you so much for commissioning all this incredible music, because they know about Laurie and Tom and obviously Richard. But 3 of my kids sang pieces by Richard yesterday, and then another teacher student sang these pieces that I commissioned, sang them. I just think there's so much more things that we can do together, and I'm so proud of the fact that I have a small piece of the American art song history. That, long after I'm gone, I hope that people, that singers will still be singing these songs, because they're all great. And I think at this point, Richard has written 16 songs for me at last count.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That includes for the Young Love?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the last songs Richard wrote for me have not been premiered yet. We tried to premiere them on October 25th, but I got sick. So, but yeah, and Laurie's 4, Tom's 6. And I just want to keep going. So.
And you both work with publishers. You have a good relationship with a publisher, so there's no question that your music gets published.
It'll get out there.
I am my own publisher now. I had a regular publisher who, and I don't want to say the name or whatever, but it was not. They were detrimental, I would say. And so I am now my own publisher.
Which is one of the great, you talked about technology a moment ago. This is one of the great things about technology, is that it enables artists to present their works more directly to the public. Well, both of you were so kind. You came to a concert of the Music of the Sphere Society about, a week and a half ago or something. And we played a piano trio by Rebecca Clark, who was a British-American composer and also a prominent violist in her time. She died, I think, about 1972.
I don't know.
I don't remember her dates now.
I think it was 75.
75? Yeah, and she was, I think, in her early 90s, so she had a long life. But she has a huge body of work that was never published during her lifetime. And she had come to the United States probably when she was about 20 years old, and entered her viola sonata and also the piano trio in competitions in Boston. I think both of those got second place or something. But even those works, she was having great difficulty getting them published, and there's something called the Rebecca Clark Society online, and it has this whole list of things. And you said you'd looked into some of her songs.
Fantastic songs.
Imagine if she were working now, that
Mm-hmm.
she could just self-publish, and would people could find her music more easily too. That's the other problem, because unless people are performing her music or have access to hearing it somehow, you are unknown to them. Yes.
Exactly.
Emily, I think we just have time for one more question.
Oh,
Okay.
Pretty much so.
Yes.
There's one more.
So is there one more question?
well, thank you.
Yes.
for
Well,
coming.
thank you so much, and bravo. Yeah. Thank you.